Final Fantasy VII is one of the most beloved and popular games in the whole franchise. This is in no small part due to the incredible soundtrack. In this video series, I want to give you a detailed track-by-track analysis of the complete score. Let's begin with some quick facts about the soundtrack. It was composed by Nobuo Uematsu and released in 1997. It has 85 different tracks, which amount to over 4.5 hours of music, and it's completely synthesized. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. The very first thing we hear, before we even start a new game, is the Prelude theme. This theme is one of the many pieces of music that have become a staple of the series. The track has been around since the very first Final Fantasy game and hasn't really changed a lot since then. It was reportedly written by Uematsu on the fly in less than 15 minutes. It consists of a simple sequence of ascending and descending notes played on a harp. In this version of the track, the harp has more of an electronic sound to it, which reflects the theme of technology in the game. From Final Fantasy IV on, Uematsu added some strings and woodwinds to the track, which provide some variety and give it more of an epic feel. On a side note, although I mentioned that the soundtrack amounts to roughly 4.5 hours in length, this number is a bit misleading, as many of the tracks are looped, which means that the end of the song connects seamlessly with the beginning to make sure they can play endlessly in the background. Because of this, a majority of the tracks on the album repeat themselves once, which artificially extends the running time. Then we start the game, and it begins on a high note. Literally, because it's a high E. Then we hear a melody, which reappears several times throughout the game. I would call this the livestream motif. We later hear an expanded version of this theme in Bugenhagen's observatory, when he gives a detailed explanation of the livestream, the planet, and Mako energy. Here you see a comparison of the two melodies. Let's listen to them side by side. Then we get our first impression of Midgar, and the music changes as well. We hear some industrial percussion and drums, and the song reaches its climax when the whole city is in full view and the game's title appears. This melody doesn't really appear anywhere else in the game. This is probably due to the fact that it was the very first thing written by Uematsu. Let's pause here. Although this track is usually listed as a single piece of music and is played that way live as well, it's really two separate songs. When the camera zooms back in to show the train arriving, the music changes dramatically. After a few cymbal hits, the fast-paced drums and the underlying piano beat begin. This beat continues for almost the whole track and provides the base for this tense and gripping song. This is also the first of many tracks in the game that fit the description action music, and this game has more of these than probably any other in the FF series. Another notable fact about this part of the game is the absence of separate battle music or a victory fanfare. I would argue that this is a good thing, as it would disturb the flow of the action-packed beginning of FF7. Much later in the game, during the attack on Midgar at the end of the second disc, this track is used again, but here it's constantly interrupted by the regular battle music. By the way, I mentioned loop tracks before, and while the first part of this track, Opening, doesn't loop, the second part, Bombing Mission, does. In conclusion, I should probably mention that composer Nobuo Uematsu has said Opening Bombing Mission is one of the finest pieces of music he's ever composed, and I would agree. When the music of Final Fantasy is performed live by an orchestra, this whole track is usually the opener. As soon as we enter the Mako reactor, the music changes. It becomes very dark, electronic, and intimidating. Barrett tells us how bad Mako energy is and what it does to the planet, but we already know that something isn't quite right here, because the music told us. Although it's hard to make out, this is also the first time we're introduced to parts of the Shinra theme. This is very cleverly made by Uematsu, as we are subconsciously prepared for the Shinra theme, and when we actually hear it for the first time, it sounds vaguely familiar. Well, that was it for part 1. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for part 2.